Good morning. We begin with breaking news from Queensland, where health authorities have made a stunning backflip over testing rules for travellers who've already entered the state. Let's go live now to Ebony Cavallaro, who's in Brisbane for us this morning. Ebony, what are the changes?
Well, Lizzie, it's a huge change. In the past, we've had one of the border requirements for Queensland is that you have to get a test on day 5 after entering the state. As of this morning, that has been entirely scrapped. The Health Minister making that announcement this morning. In previous days, we have seen huge lines for testing here in Queensland, and in part, the reason for that has been blamed on this day 5 testing requirement. This will allow some more flexibility and hopefully free up a little bit more space for people who might be experiencing symptoms to get one. We have heard that some people have been waiting up to 3 hours for tests. Today, the state government has announced that more testing locations will be activated in response to that. One on the Sunshine Coast in Noosa and another one here in Brisbane. There are more than 200 places where people can now get those tests. The figures today in Queensland, well, 1,158 new cases here. The good news, though, is that there are only 6 people in hospital and none of them in intensive care. Here's what the Health Minister had to say about this big change this morning.
Anyone who is waiting in lines now for their day 5 test can leave. They will not be required to get day 5 tests from now.
Lizzie, while this will help ease the load here in Queensland, what it won't help do is ease that load interstate, where other people might be getting their tests, that they are required to get a negative COVID test before entering Queensland within 72 hours. It will not reduce that load, and I do know that other premiers and state ministers are in discussions over that, and we expect to hear more about that test in coming days.
Ebony Cavallaro there for us in Brisbane, and this is certainly not the news the New South Wales government was hoping for, pushing for the PCR testing to be into Queensland to be scrapped. For more on this, Liz Daniels is here in studio with me. Liz, the New South Wales Health Minister has been pretty clear on his message to the Queensland Premier on this.
That's right, Lizzie. Brad Hazzard this morning gave Anastasia Palaszczuk a verbal tongue lashing over this, saying that her actions on PCR testing are passive-aggressive stupidity. He wants the Queensland Premier to scrap that requirement for anyone travelling over the border to have a PCR test 72 hours in advance. Effectively, it's putting enormous pressure on the system here in New South Wales. The government calls it tourism testing, and they think it's accounting for about 20% of the tests being done here in New South Wales. Asymptomatic people just wanting to go on a holiday. So have a listen to what Brad Hazzard said to Anastasia Palaszczuk this morning.
And I would ask the Premier of Queensland to please just rethink the 1 January issue. We appreciate that there are issues in Queensland as well to be managed, but we believe they can be adequately managed both for your own residents and our residents by actually introducing rapid antigen testing, but certainly dropping the need for the PCR testing.
So this scrapping of the day 5 test, it helps in Queensland, but not here in Sydney. Those queues are enormous again this morning.
That's right, Lizzie. So the pressure on the system here in Sydney is enormous. I think we've got some live shots now. We can take you. This is Bondi right now in Sydney, and look at that queue. It is enormous and it is slow moving. It banks up for kilometres, and you can imagine people are waiting hours in those testing queues. And part of the problem is that because of the public holidays, many of our testing clinics are closed. I think we can take you now to Penrith and have a look at that. This is one of the testing clinics that is the most busy, usually on days when it is open, but today closed due to the public holiday, and that is adding more pressure to the system. The public holidays, obviously we had Christmas, Boxing Day, and then 2 public holidays in a row. So 4 days of testing clinics that have been closed. And Lizzie, the other thing that we should mention today is that we're doing about 100 to 150,000 tests a day. And yes, a lot of them are due to the fact that those interstate testing requirements, but there are also requirements here. So if you're an international arrival, for example, you need a day 6 test. Now, the Health Minister, Brad Hazzard, said that he is now in talks with both Victoria and the federal government to see if the government is willing to scrap that day 6 testing requirement to try to ease some of the burden. The other thing that they're looking at is whether or not people who are going into surgery, women who are having babies, whether or not they need to continue having those 72-hour PCR tests, because we know that those sorts of asymptomatic testing is helping to put that enormous pressure on the system, and we have seen a massive bungle in Sydney with that SydPath clinic. 995 people notified that they were negative when in fact the results had not been processed. And Lizzie, we now know that about half of those people are positive, and they have been circulating unknowingly in the community.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. Liz Daniels, thank you. An Adelaide teen accused of going to a nightclub while knowingly COVID positive has been charged. Ralph McIntosh, who's from one of South Australia's wealthiest families, was released from custody this morning. The 19-year-old was initially denied bail, but that decision was overturned. He will face court tomorrow. The Boxing Day test is going ahead in Melbourne this morning. Despite a COVID scare in the visitors' camp, Isabella Stashkovsky has more.
All players from the Australian and English sides have returned negative PCR tests this morning. A huge relief, meaning the Ashes has resumed as planned for day 3. A family from both camps have also returned negative tests. The staff and family members linked to the English side, who tested positive yesterday, are this morning in isolation. It certainly was a scare, but all in all has run rather smoothly. Cricket Australia was calm through the process, confident in the measures it had put in place. If a similar situation had occurred in Sydney or Hobart, however, the entire English side would have likely been in hard isolation for a week. The big question now is how will authorities in those states react to a similar scenario after seeing this play out in Melbourne. Hopefully it is a positive sign showing with good measures in place it is possible to move forward.
A major search is underway for 2 siblings missing in the New South Wales Central West. 14-year-old Eli and 12-year-old Hannah Jones were visiting family at a rural property at Kane's Flat near Mudgee. They went for a bushwalk around 2:30 yesterday afternoon, but they didn't return. New data has revealed the United States is averaging close to 200,000 daily COVID cases, with predictions that number could rise to 500,000 in a week. It comes as New York sees a 190% increase in hospital admissions, topping 5,500 for the first time since February. New vaccine requirements have been introduced there as a result. The UK Health Secretary has announced there won't be any further COVID restrictions in England before the new year. It comes despite Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland bringing in new rules, including caps on gatherings.
Of course, people should remain cautious as we approach New Year celebrations, and take a lateral flow test if that makes sense. Celebrate outside if you can. Have some ventilation indoors if you can.
England recorded more than 113,000 cases on Christmas Day, with the Omicron variant making up 90% of the country's total cases. Israel has started administering a 4th COVID jab to medical workers. 150 people who had their 3rd jab at least 4 months ago are taking part in the trial. It will determine how effective a 2nd round of booster shots is against the Omicron variant. Results are expected in 2 weeks.